You're on the couch. Your dog walks over, turns around, and lowers all of his weight directly onto your chest like furniture deciding where it belongs. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice you picked up from the internet says, he's trying to be dominant, he's claiming you, you're letting him think he's the boss. Here's the problem with that voice. The whole theory underneath it was retracted by the scientist who made it famous. He spent the next 20 years of his life trying to take it back, and even asked his own publisher to stop printing his book. So if it isn't about rank, what is a dog actually doing when he climbs on top of you? Because the real answer is older, stranger, and far more flattering than dominance. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you 4 things scientists can measure inside your dog the moment he settles his weight onto yours, and one version of this behavior that you should never ignore. I'm PetMindLabs. Let's look at what's really happening. For about 40 years, one idea ran the entire conversation about dog behavior. It went like this. Dogs are wolves in disguise. Wolves live in packs ruled by an alpha who fights his way to the top. Therefore, every pushy thing your dog does, leaning, climbing, walking through doorways first, sleeping on your pillow is a move in a status game. Let him win, the story said, and you've handed him the crown. It is a clean story. It is also wrong at the root, and it's worth knowing exactly where the crack runs. The alpha wolf was born in captivity. The original observations came from wolves that researchers had thrown together into enclosures in the mid-20th century, unrelated adults, caged, competing over food and space. Of course they fought. Of course a hierarchy formed. But that's a refugee camp, not a family. Watching strangers locked in a pen and concluding, this is how wolves live, is like watching strangers fight over the last seat on a delayed train and concluding, this is how humans raise children. It took decades to fix. The biologist, David Mech, the man whose 1,970 book put alpha wolf into the language, went and watched wild wolves year after year on Ellesmere Island in the high Arctic. And he found something that contradicted his own famous book. Wild packs aren't gangs of rivals clawing for rank. They're families. The alphas are simply the parents. The rest of the pack are their offspring from previous years. Nobody battled their way to the top. They just had a litter, and the pups followed their mom and dad the way pups do. Mech was so troubled by what he'd started that he tried to pull the original book out of print, and in 1999 he published a correction in the Canadian Journal of Zoology spelling it out. In the wild, alpha doesn't describe how wolves actually live. The man who built the tower spent his later career taking it down, and yet the idea outlived the evidence, because it had already escaped into dog training, into television, into 1,000 articles, telling you to be the alpha in your own home. But here's the part that should really stop you. Even if the alpha wolf model were true for wolves, and it isn't, your dog is still not a wolf. Your dog is the product of something like 15,000 years of evolution, away from the wolf and toward us. Over those millennia, dogs didn't just get friendlier, they got specialized at reading people. There's a striking study that makes this concrete. In 2002, Brian Hare and colleagues published work in the journal Science, showing that dogs are better than great apes at one very specific thing, reading human communicative signals. Hide food under one of 2 cups, then point at the right one, or just look at it, and a dog will follow your cue and pick correctly, more reliably than a chimpanzee, our close primate cousin. Even more telling, hand-raised wolves don't do it nearly as well, while puppies just a few weeks old, with almost no human contact, already can. This isn't something dogs pick up from living with us. It's something they were built for, through domestication. Dogs evolved to look to us to treat us as partners and sources of safety, not to compete with us for a crown. So when a dog lies on your chest and asks for nothing but to be near you, the question, is he being the alpha, isn't just unkind, it's a category error. It's like asking whether your toddler climbing into your lap is staging a coup. It's the wrong question, built on a story science already walked back. Let's ask the right one. What is the body of your dog actually doing? Because there are at least 4 things we can measure, and not one of them is about rank. Start with the oldest system, because it's the one that explains the most. In 1998, a team led by Josef Topal did something clever. They took the test psychologists use to measure how human babies bond to their parents' Ainsworth's strange situation and adapted it for dogs. 51 dogs and their owners went through a sequence of separations and reunions with a stranger in an unfamiliar room. The dogs behaved like attached children. They explored and played more when their owner was in the room. After a separation, they aimed their greeting and their contact seeking specifically at the owner, not at the stranger. The owner wasn't just a familiar face, the owner was a base of security the dog organized its whole behavior around. That's the foundation. Your dog relates to you the way an infant relates to a parent. Closeness to you isn't a preference. it's a system. And the specificity of that bond is sharper than people expect. Earlier work had already shown that when you drop a dog into a strange, mildly stressful environment, the presence of a familiar human lowers the dog's cortisol, its main stress hormone, while the presence of another familiar dog doesn't do the same job. Sit with that for a second. For a deeply social, pack-descended animal, it isn't just any companion that calms the body. It's specifically the human it's attached to. Chemically, you are not interchangeable with the other dog in the house. You're the one the dog's body counts on. But behavior can be argued about, so researchers went looking for the signal underneath the behavior, the heart. In a 2013 study led by Gácsi, 30 dogs wore non-invasive heart monitors while a threatening stranger approached them twice, once while the dog was alone, and once while the owner stood nearby. When the stranger advanced and the dog was alone, the dog's heart rate climbed. When the same stranger advanced with the owner present, the heart rate still rose, but significantly less. The owner's body in the room measurably blunted the dog's stress response. The authors called it a human analog safe haven effect. In plain terms, you are a stress buffer your dog can feel in its own pulse. And it goes further. The order mattered. Dogs that met the scary stranger first with their owner present stayed calmer even later, when they faced that same stranger alone. The owner didn't just lower the alarm in the moment the dog carried a residue of that safety forward into the next encounter. That's not affection as decoration. That's a security system with memory. There's one more piece, and it shows how deep this runs. Also in 2013, a team led by Lisa Horn gave dogs a puzzle, a task they could work at to earn a reward, and varied just one thing: whether the owner was present. The dogs worked at the puzzle longer when their owner was in the room than when the owner was gone. And here's the detail that matters. It didn't matter whether the owner cheered the dog on out loud or sat there silently. The owner's mere presence was enough. Replace the owner with a stranger, and the effect weakened. This is exactly what we see in human children. With a trusted figure nearby, they're braver, they persist longer, they engage more with the world. Your dog uses you as a secure base to operate from, so put System 1 together. Your dog is wired to treat you as a parent figure. Your presence lowers its measurable stress and raises its courage. Now ask what a dog does with a safe haven when the world gets loud. A thunderstorm, fireworks, a doorbell, a house full of strangers. It goes to the haven. It closes the distance. Climbing on top of you isn't a power play. It's a dog returning to the one place on Earth its nervous system trusts. The second system is almost embarrassingly physical, and most people miss it entirely. Your dog runs hot. A healthy dog's core temperature sits between about 101 and 102.5 degrees Fahrenheit, a few degrees above yours. You might think that would make them avoid you for heat. But thermoregulation isn't about average warmth. It's about not bleeding heat at the edges, and about feeling safe enough to fully let go. Go back to the very beginning of a dog's life. Newborn puppies can't regulate their own body temperature for the first weeks. Their internal thermostat simply isn't online yet. The only thing standing between a puppy and dangerous heat loss is contact, the warm wall of its mother and the pile of its littermates. For a young canine, body-to-body contact equals survival. That wiring doesn't get deleted when the dog grows up. It gets carried. So, when an adult dog presses its full length against you, or climbs up to share your surface area, part of what's running is the oldest comfort it has ever known, borrowing the thermal stability of a larger, warmer body exactly the way it did at 3 weeks old. You are, in the most literal sense, a heated bed that also happens to love it back. This is why the behavior spikes in winter, in air conditioning, after a bath, on cold tile, late at night when the house cools down. It isn't random neediness. It's a thermostat with a heartbeat, finding the warmest, safest spot in the house, which, again, is you. And notice how the first two systems stack. The place that's warmest is also the place that's safest. Evolution didn't make your dog choose between comfort and security. It put them in the same spot, and that spot is your lap. The third system is chemical. And it's the one that explains why this becomes a habit, why your dog doesn't just do it once, but comes back to your chest night after night. It runs in both directions, which is the surprising part. In 2000, the researcher Johannes Odendahl measured what happened in the blood when people had a calm, friendly interaction with their own dog. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone tied to trust, calm, and connection, rose sharply in the humans. In his data, it nearly doubled from baseline. Years later, a team led by Linda Handlin found the matching half of the story. When women petted their own dogs, their oxytocin rose while their stress hormone, cortisol, dropped, and so did their blood pressure. Contact with your dog measurably changes your chemistry, not just your mood. And in 2015, Takafumi Nagasawa's lab published a finding in the journal Science that surprised even the researchers. When dogs and their owners simply gazed at each other, oxytocin rose in both a positive feedback loop that, until then, scientists had mainly documented between human mothers and their infants. Your dog had, in effect, borrowed the same bonding circuitry that ties a parent to a baby. I want to be careful here, because you'll see wildly specific numbers thrown around online about exactly how much oxytocin spikes. The clean, defensible claim, the one the science actually supports, is this: friendly contact and connection between you and your dog raise the bonding chemistry on both sides of the leash. So when your dog lies on you and goes heavy and soft, this isn't poetry. There's a measurable chemical reward happening for the dog and for you. The behavior persists for the simplest reason in all of biology. It feels good on both ends, and it strengthens the bond that keeps the two of you together. Evolution didn't need your dog to understand a word of this. It only needed the dogs that pressed close to their humans to end up calmer, warmer, and more bonded than the dogs that kept their distance. Those are the dogs that thrived alongside us. Yours is their descendant. Here's a practical layer most explanations skip. Where your dog puts its weight is information. It's the same systems underneath, but the spot tells you which one is turned up loudest in the moment. A dog that climbs onto your chest or lap and settles face to face is usually running the bonding and safety program at full volume. That's the closest a dog can physically get to you, near your face, your scent, your heartbeat. It's the posture most loaded with attachment. A dog that lies across your feet or against your legs is often doing something a little different, staying connected while keeping a foot, literally, on the exits. It wants contact and a repeat on the room. Many dogs park on your feet precisely when there's mild uncertainty around. A new guest, an unfamiliar house, a vet waiting room. That's contact plus surveillance. And the lean, the full body press against your leg while you're standing is one of the most quietly affectionate things a dog does. There's an old myth that leaning is a dominance move, a dog pushing you around. It isn't. A leaning dog is doing the standing up version of climbing onto you, maximizing contact with its safe haven while staying mobile. Same calm it's after, just without lying down. None of these are bids for control. They're the same message, "You are my safe place," delivered in slightly different dialects depending on how the dog feels and how much of the world it's trying to keep an eye on. Put the four systems side by side and the whole picture flips. The dominance story said, "My dog is on top of me to sit above me." The evidence says, your dog is on top of you because you are the safest, warmest, most chemically rewarding object in its known universe, and a deep stack of mammal wiring is telling it to close the distance. It's not reaching over you, it's reaching for you. And this isn't just a warmer interpretation, it's where behavioral science itself landed. In 2009, John Bradshaw and colleagues at the University of Bristol published a paper with a blunt title, "Dominance in Domestic Dogs, Useful Construct or Bad Habit?" Their core argument was that the word dominance had been quietly smuggled from describing a relationship into describing a supposed trait of an individual dog, as if some dogs are simply born scheming to run the household. There's little evidence such a trait exists. Dominance, where it shows up at all, is about who gets a specific resource in a specific moment, not a personality, and certainly not a master plan that includes lying on your legs during a movie. Here's the line from that paper that should change how you act. They found that training built on reducing dominance ranged from useless to actively dangerous because it routinely turns a dog's normal, anxious, or affectionate behavior into a confrontation that the human started. Think about what the dominance frame actually instructs you to do. Your dog climbs onto you seeking safety, warmth, and connection. And the advice says, remove it, claim your space. Don't let it think it's in charge. So, in the precise moment your dog's nervous system reaches for its safe haven, you become the thing that pushes it away. And the danger here isn't theoretical. In 2009, a team led by Herron at the University of Pennsylvania surveyed owners of dogs with behavior problems about the training methods they'd tried and how their dogs had responded. The confrontational, dominant-style techniques produced alarming numbers. Physically rolling a dog onto its back and pinning it, the famous alpha roll, triggered an aggressive response from about 31% of the dogs it was used on. Growling at your dog, 41%. Hitting or kicking for bad behavior, 43%. Staring a dog down, 30%. Read those again. When you treat a dog like a rival to be put in its place, something like 1 in 3 or 4 times, the dog answers the only way a cornered animal can, with its teeth. The dominance frame doesn't just misread the behavior. It manufactures the exact aggression it claims to prevent, and it puts the person doing it at real risk of being bitten. So the reframe isn't soft. In a way, it asks more of you. It asks you to stop refereeing a status contest that was never happening and start actually reading a nervous system that is. A dog on your chest is handing you real information. Right now, I need you to be the safe place. That's not a behavior to correct. Most of the time, it's the relationship working exactly as 15,000 years designed it to. But most of the time is carrying real weight in that sentence. And before I show you the version that genuinely needs your attention, let me answer the objections, because I know what some of you are thinking. Whenever I lay this out, the same handful of behaviors come up, because they've all been branded as proof your dog is trying to be alpha. Let's take them one at a time, because everyone has a better explanation than rank. He barges through the door ahead of me. This is the classic. The dominant story says he's asserting status by leading. The plain reality. He's faster than you, he's excited. The interesting stuff is on the other side of that door, and nobody ever taught him to wait. A dog rushing a doorway is a dog with a lot of enthusiasm and not much impulse control, not a dog running a hierarchy. The fix isn't a power struggle. It's teaching him that calm gets the door open and shoving doesn't. He sleeps on the bed, isn't that him taking my territory? No. Go back to the 4 systems. The bed is the warmest, softest, most owner-centered spot in the house, occupied by his safe haven. A dog on the bed is a dog maximizing safety, warmth, and closeness all at once. If you'd rather he didn't, that's a perfectly fine personal preference. Just enforce it as a trained boundary with a comfortable alternative nearby, not as a battle for the throne. He humps things, that's dominance, right? This is one of the most misread behaviors in all of dog ownership. Mounting in pet dogs is far more often about arousal, overexcitement, stress, or plain habit than about status. An overstimulated dog at a busy park, an anxious dog, a dog that learned it gets a big reaction, those are the usual drivers. Reading every hump as a dominance bid sends you down completely the wrong road. The useful questions are, how worked up is this dog, and what set it off? He growls when I move him off the couch. This one feels like the smoking gun, and it's actually the most important to get right, because handling it wrong is how people get bitten. A dog that growls when disturbed in a resting spot is usually guarding something it values, or reacting to being startled or handled in a way that feels threatening, not staging a takeover. And remember the Herron data. Confronting that growl with force is exactly what flips it into a bite. A growl is information I'm uncomfortable. Please don't. And the safe path is to make moving rewarding. Toss a treat to lure the dog off, and talk to a professional if it's frequent or intense. Punishing the growl only teaches the dog to skip the warning next time. Notice the pattern. Every one of these has a cleaner, evidence-based explanation rooted in emotion, arousal, learning, or an unmet need, and everyone gets worse when you treat it as a status fight. The dominance lens doesn't just misread your dog. It reliably points you at the most damaging possible response. Which brings us, at last, to the version of climbing on you that genuinely deserves your attention. Let's make all of this usable. The goal isn't to indulge everything, and it isn't to correct everything. The goal is to read it correctly, and then respond to what you actually see. First, the freeing part. Most of the time, you don't have to do anything at all. A dog that climbs on you in the evening, on cold days, during storms, when guests arrive, or right before sleep is using you exactly as designed. If you're comfortable with the contact, letting it happen is not spoiling your dog, and it is not breeding a tyrant. You're answering a request for safety and warmth, and you're collecting an oxytocin dividend for it. Lower stress, lower blood pressure, a stronger bond. On this one, the science is firmly on the side of the cuddle. Second, if you do need boundaries, build them without breaking trust. Maybe your dog is 80 pounds and you have a bad back. Maybe you just don't want a dog on the couch. Both are completely legitimate. The dominance playbook says shove the dog off and assert yourself. The better approach uses the very attachment system you just learned about. Don't deny the need. Redirect it to a spot that works for both of you. Put a dog bed pressed right up against the couch, or a blanket that smells like you in a chosen corner. Then reward the dog for settling there with the thing it's actually after. Calm, warm, predictable attention. You're not slamming the door on the need. You're giving it a better address. That's how you keep the trust and save your spine at the same time. A quick word on size and life stage, because it changes how this looks. A tiny dog that lives in laps is partly a thermoregulation story. Small bodies lose heat fast, so they seek contact more. A puppy that climbs on you constantly is replaying littermate behavior and learning where its new safe haven is. That's normal, and it usually settles as the dog grows in age and confidence. A senior dog that has always been independent and is now suddenly seeking your lap is a different signal entirely, and that brings us to the part to slow down for. Third, and most important, watch for the sudden change. Everything I've described is about a baseline, your dog's normal, stable way of seeking closeness. The signal that genuinely matters is when that baseline suddenly shifts. A dog that was independent and is now abruptly glued to you, climbing on constantly, trailing you from room to room when it never used to. That is not a personality update. It's a message, and it points in two main directions. The first is pain or illness. Dogs can't tell you something feels wrong, so some of them do the only thing that has ever helped. They move closer to their safe haven. A new, unexplained jump in clinginess can ride alongside something physical discomfort, failing eyesight or hearing, the cognitive changes that come with age. This isn't a diagnosis, and it isn't a reason to panic. It's a reason to notice, and if the change is real and it sticks around, to get a checkup. You're not being paranoid. You're reading the one tool your dog has for telling you it needs help. The second direction is separation-related distress, and here it's worth getting the language exactly right, because people confuse two very different things. A Velcro dog follows you around and leans on you while you're home. That's just a clingy, social dog, and it's completely fine. Separation anxiety is a different animal. It's panic that switches on the moment you leave. Pacing, destruction, nonstop howling, house soiling, a dog that cannot settle until you come back. Estimates of how common separation-related problems are vary widely depending on how researchers count, landing very roughly somewhere between 1 in 7 and 1 in 5 dogs. So if the on-you behavior at home comes paired with your dog falling apart when you're gone, that's not your dog's love running too hot. It's distress. And if you land in that second column, the worst thing you can do is treat the closeness itself as the problem, and try to toughen the dog up by pushing it away. That tends to make a frightened dog more frightened. What actually helps is building independence, gently, on the dog's terms. In practice, that looks like a few specific moves. Reward your dog for choosing to settle calmly a short distance from you, so being a few feet away becomes its own small win. Make your comings and goings boring, skip the dramatic goodbyes, and the over-the-top reunions that turn your departure into the biggest event of the day. Practice absences in tiny doses, starting with seconds and stepping up slowly, so the dog keeps learning that you always come back before the panic ever switches on. And leave it something genuinely absorbing for alone time, a food puzzle. A long-lasting chew, so being by itself becomes mildly good instead of purely scary. If the panic is severe, if the dog is hurting itself, destroying the house, or never settling, that's the point to bring in your vet or a qualified behaviorist, because real separation anxiety sometimes needs a proper treatment plan, not just willpower. None of that is spoiling. All of it is teaching a scared animal that safety doesn't have to be glued to your side every second. So, here's the whole practical filter in one breath. Is this your dog's normal way of seeking you on cold nights, during storms, at the end of a long day? Then enjoy it. That's the bond doing its job. Did it appear suddenly, or does it come bundled with panic when you leave? Then read it as a request for help, and answer it with a checkup, with patience, and if needed, with a professional. Either way, and this is the whole point, the answer is never, show it who's boss. Here's where I want to leave you. For decades, we were told that a dog on top of us was an animal reaching up, grabbing for status, testing the hierarchy, trying to win. The science took that story apart, piece by piece, until even the man who built it spent his life dismantling it. And what's actually happening turns out to be the exact opposite of reaching up. It's a dog reaching in toward the one body in the world that lowers its heart rate, holds its warmth, lends it the courage to face the room, and floods both of you with the chemistry of belonging. Your dog can't tell you that you are its safe haven. It can only lie down on you and let you feel the weight of it. And now you know what that weight is made of. An attachment system older than agriculture, a thermostat that chose you, a courage it borrows from your presence, and a hormone that runs in both directions. The next time your dog climbs on, you won't see a dog being dominant. You'll see a nervous system that decided, out of every place on the entire planet, that the safest one is you. That's not a small thing to be, that's the whole thing. That kind of meaning is easy to miss until someone points it out, which is exactly what we do here. At PetMindLabs, we don't guess what dogs feel. We read what the science can actually measure. If this gave you a new way to see your own dog, here's how you can help us keep making it. Tell me in the comments, where does your dog climb on you? Your chest, your lap, your feet, and when does it happen most? I read these, and the patterns you describe genuinely shape what we dig into next. If this changed how you'll read your dog tonight, subscribe. We go one behavior deeper every week. Evidence first, myths last. And if you want the rest of this story, what your dog is telling you with its eyes, its tail, the way it shadows you through the house, there's a whole series here building toward a single idea. The bond between you and your dog is a measurable biological event, deeper than you think. This was PetMindLabs. I'll see you in the next one.